Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. So we are going to have a set of tutorials, a pair of tutorials given by Hirst and Jiakang, who will be giving a tutorial on this set of lectures that we heard from Professor Yang-Hui He over the last week on machine learning and collaboration and so on. So Ed, yeah, over to you.
Thanks very much. Yes, hello everybody. As said, I'm Ed. I'm one of Yang's PhD students, and I'm going to do the first half and then pass over to Jiakang for the second half. And for my part, I think I'm going to do sort of a bit more of a hands-on demonstration for people really sort of first time doing ML. So I'm going to assume you haven't really done any before, but I'm going to give you a script. In fact, let me send that now in the chat, and then I'll also send it to the organizers to put online afterwards as well, if they would like to add that too. So yeah, so give me one moment. And yep, cool. So there's a zip file which just has like a couple of data sets and a script that we're going to be working through today. But I'll do it all live, so you can just follow and take notes if you'd rather than actually code at the same time. So really, I'm going to assume almost no knowledge, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have like a skeleton script that you can, whenever you have your own data sets and your own projects, you can just run some quick neural networks or other architectures to do some learning on them. So yeah, really, it should be a nice tool for you to do some work with afterwards. So if I start with, get going, do a screen share. So this is a Spider. This is an IDE. So to give a quick intro to what that is. So I'm going to be coding in Python today. I think Python's pretty much the industry standard for most data analysis now. Obviously, it's quite a high level language, so it's quite easy to work with. Yang prefers Mathematica. I know he did some of that in the class, the lecture with you guys yesterday, but Mathematica obviously isn't free. So I prefer Python as well. And I think the open source makes it much sort of quicker. There's a lot more potential there because there's a lot more people developing it. So I'd recommend for a package manager using Anaconda. So yeah, a pun on Python, more snakes. But yeah, you can just Google it online and download the latest form that you, or the latest version that you want to work with, depending on what your computer is, etc. Once you have that, it's this same sort of circular snake logo, which you can open like this. And then this is your package manager of sorts. You have different environments depending on different combinations of packages you want. And packages are just sort of your sets of functions that you will do the analysis. Say you have a statistics package for doing statistical analysis, a machine learning package for some machine learning, some topological data analysis one for something like that. And you can mix and match them in different combinations in different environments. So here you can see I've got a variety of environments, one for topological data analysis there, one for sort of some yellow brick stuff, which I think Jiakang will talk about in his section, which is some visualization techniques for ML. But I'm just going to stick to the base one. We're not going to do anything too heavy. And in this base one, we have a variety of different, what would you say? I mean, interactive developing environments, IDEs. The most popular are Jupyter and Spider. So really only worry about these. Jupyter's sort of good for teaching. So maybe you might have seen that before, but I think it's not very practical for sort of normal use because it's a bit cluttered with how the outputs are displayed. So I prefer Spider. I'd highly recommend this. It's already been installed with Anaconda, so you can just launch it straight away. So this is how it's set up here. So some sort of, to give a quick intro to how it's set up like this. This is the console. So this is the interaction with the computer. This is where you do everything you want with Anaconda, with Spider and Python. So you can treat it like a normal calculator, input stuff, and it will output the answer that you're looking for. I don't know, you can do some crazy stuff too. Like it does, it's a very fast calculator if you did want to use it. So at the same time, you can hard code in what you want it to do straight into the console and it will run it. And also you can send it information from a script. So here we're going to have a script of information, and then it's going to send that that list of instructions to the computer, which it runs here, and it then outputs what relevantly happens. Here's now just sort of extra information. So it's obviously help if you want to look for stuff. This is a variable explorer. So you can keep track, like if I wanted to make some kind of list of data here, it will then keep track of it and tell you what's here. And then we can use, use that list again later on when the console is still running. So here it just has the information, the name of it, the type of it's a list, how big it is, and then you can actually open it and have a look at it too. So it's quite a useful layout, and plots will come out here. And finally as well, you just need to check that your data file, so this is the current folder that the console is running in. You want to make that the same file as your data is in, or at least one such that your data, so here we have our data paths that they match on, they add on to the end of this to get to the correct data. Nice, so that I think says that well. So the other thing I just wanted to say is that here, this notation for in Spider, you have this sort of symbol here, which denotes separation into cells. So when I send instructions to the console to run, it will just run up to this horizontal line. And then when I'm in this one, it will just run everything within those two horizontal lines. So it can run sequentially, and that way, you know, if you make I were to make a mistake in this, then I can edit it and go back and just run this one. I don't need to rerun everything before it. So it's you know, a nice way to segment your work as well. So that's just what's going on here with this segmentation. So we'll come on to this. So we'll come back onto what's going on here. So here's there's a specific example I run through related to a paper I've worked on with Yang and David Berman as well. But we'll come back to that in a second. I'll just talk a little bit more about the setup of the Python and the machine learning. So for here with this first cell, we're doing some package importing. So here's an example of a package NumPy we've imported, a popular one in Python for handling data, particularly because the arrays are very efficient for handling those. And then another important one we've importing is scikit-learn, abbreviated sklearn here, and we're just using this as our machine learning library. So for Python, I would recommend this as a really sort of the first port of call for machine learning, because it's packaged together really nicely. Like all the classes and functions are very easy to work with, easily explained. And as you can see here, we don't require much code to be able to do some machine learning with some quite complicated architectures. So most commonly, when you get very deep into machine learning, most people use TensorFlow or PyTorch, and they require a lot more coding there to design each stage of the training and each stage of the testing, etc. So, you know, we're just going to avoid all that today since we don't have a huge amount of time. We're just going to use scikit-learn. It does everything for the beginner, so it's really good for practical use and even for use with research too. So yep, here we've imported scikit-learn. So if you need to install it first, perhaps you can do this. Use conda as the name of the installer and literally tell the console to do it. Obviously mine's installed, so I won't need to do that. But if you, otherwise you can just go to the website scikit-learn online, which is, it's spelled like, well, I guess I can show you actually as well. So yeah, this is the website, and it, you know, it has some information as well about the classifiers and the clustering, you know, other things that you can do with it. But yeah, this is the information for the package. So that's sort of is that everything I wanted to say. Yeah, why don't we have a look at this as well? So if I also I'll come back to this. So now this is the setup for importing the packages that we're working with. As I say, we need to install scikit-learn, and then we can import specific functions and rename them. So here I've imported the function confusion matrix and renamed it for me to use later in the text. So this first cell, which we've already run here, it just sets up all the extra functionality that we're going to use during Python. So it's done all that for us, which is nice. And now this second cell, this is going to import the data. So here, if I run this, I know the file path is correct. And now if we look at our variable explorer, we have 2 extra files. One of them is called weights and one of them is called Hodge. So these NumPy arrays, they're very big arrays. They're rows, 7,555 rows. So there's a good amount of data for us to work with, and they're all integers as well. So it's a very nice data set for us to get started with. So another thing I'll just show you, which is useful, is slicing in arrays. So if I wanted to take this large array and I just wanted to output the first entry, then I would just input a 0 in between these square brackets, and it returns that first row, which is these ones as we see here. If I wanted to instead return, say, the first 10 rows, then I could write it like this. And here we have the first 10 rows just listed out of these weights. This is some nice slicing. I can then also use the negative symbol to count back from the end. So it's -3, the -3rd row from the end. And then we can do some complicated slicing too. We can do something like this, which I'll explain in a second. So here we now have some more complicated stuff, and this takes the -3rd row to the end, because there's the colon separates connecting stuff, and then there's the first to the third column of that. So if I was to just print those last 3 rows, you can see it's just taken this first column and this second column up to, but not including the third. So the indexing as well for Python and for most good computational languages starts with 0. I know some of them start with 1, but that's messy. So it starts with 0. So that's why you have to get a bit used to how that indexing changes. Okay, I think that's sort of everything for the sort of first intro to touching onto scikit-learn. So I'll probably do a quick refresher of just the ML theory that we'll use today. So it'll be very, very short, but I'll explain a little bit about that. But yeah, I guess first of all, are there any questions? Now's the time to,
yeah. I just wanted to ask one thing. So this, let's say this data for these weights and for the weighted projective spaces and their numbers and so on, like where is it available? Like if I want all these things, in a file.
Yes, nice. So so I've sent a zip to the chat which has that all packaged together already, so you wouldn't have to change the file paths and stuff. But the data of the weights, that's we've taken that from the Shaka database available online. I've added a little reference to it, the relevant paper as well at the bottom here for that. And this provides the weights and the Hodge numbers for this specific set of projective spaces. So yeah, it's available there to work with. I have to really big up this database as well. Like they really provide a large amount of data related to Calabi-Yão's that you can play around with very, very easily. So big thanks to them for making that all so easy for everybody else. Yeah, any other questions just about, this is just about the first setup of Python. So obviously it's a very quick starter. Cool. Okay, nice. So in which case, let me just do a very quick refresher of what we're going to be looking at today. Head set up. So, yeah, this looks good. Okay, so what we're going to be, so just, to refresh from the beginning, machine learning splits itself nicely into 3 categories, which I presume Yang's talked to you about a little bit. There's supervised machine learning, unsupervised machine learning, and reinforcement learning. So yeah, these are the sort of 3 types of machine learning we split into. Reinforcement learning is sort of using an agent to search a state space. So this is quite an unusual architecture form. So yeah, this is a little bit different. You're trying to train a body to be able to optimize some problems. So it's a very useful architecture, but it's a bit harder to code up because it's a slightly different structure. So we're not going to be looking at that today. And then supervised and unsupervised separate quite nicely. This is supervised is when you have input and output data. So unsupervised is when you only have input data. So when you work with supervised, it's literally supervised because you know the output. So you can supervise it with it to check that it's learning to the correct output. So we're effectively doing complicated function fitting in most scenarios of supervised learning. And then the unsupervised is sort of clustering and PCA and other sort of behaviors. But today we're going to just focus on supervised. So we're going to be using neural networks and logistic regressors, support vector machines, random forests, so sort of some architectures Yang's probably spoken about. Neural networks in particular are obviously the most popular, they're the most tailorable. You can do a lot with them. And again, they're also really nicely set up in scikit-learn. So from this supervised learning, so here we have this input and output. So we're doing, as I say, some function fitting, but supervised learning splits itself up into some categories as well. The first of these is, which one shall I do this? Yeah, the first of these is regression. And in this scenario, your outputs are some, I don't know, I'll put it like this. There's some infinite number of outputs that occur on some scale. So you want to map it really to some real numbers. It could even be some higher dimensional set as well. And then the other option is classification. And this is when the outputs are some finite set. So here we just have a certain number. So classifying is really just sorting into classes as it suits the name well, whereas regression is learning to output something that is close in the space and the output space to the true output. So slightly different styles, they learn different things. And when working with them, you have slightly different parameters for your training, which I'll come back and talk to when we do neural nets. So also within this, there's a sub part of classification called binary classification. And this is when the output is just 0 or 1, as you'd expect. Binary, there's just two options. So here we're just trying to classify the input data into two classes of 0 or 1 for the output data. Okay, nice. So the first, just setting up the Zoom info. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's supervised machine learning is what we're going to focus on. We're going to use both regression and classification in what we're going to look at, and more specifically, we're going to use some architectures which I'll just quickly refresh as well. So neural networks are the most popular one. These can be used for regression and classification. So they're, again, pretty tailorable. You can effectively, in some ways, use regression architectures for a lot of classification problems as well. Because, yeah, obviously, if the output set is, some set list of integers, you can embed that into the real space of the outputs for regression as well. So it's quite easy to tailor. But yeah, the neural networks we're going to use for both. So neural networks, also called multi-layer perceptrons, these MLPs, and the perceptron is the neuron. So each neuron will take a variety of inputs. Oops, sorry, got a cat. A variety of inputs. It will do at the neuron some linear and nonlinear action, and then it will give some output. So if I was to collect these are the inputs, and this is the output. So then, yeah, we can collect these into some vector, and then at the neuron, there's going to be some action like this. So there's a dot product. So there's a list of weights and a bias. So these are all parameters that for each neuron has a list of parameters that are trained. And then there is some activation function which acts on this. So here, all of the weights and the bias that make up this weight vector and the single bias number These are the hyperparameters of the neuron, which are trained during the fitting process. And yeah, because in the neural network, we have loads of neurons in loads of different layers all connected together. There's a very huge number of parameters. It's a really big parameter space that is learnt on to try and optimize the function fitting. And then this activation function is a nonlinear action. So you sort of think at each layer or each neuron, you're doing one action of nonlinear. So you're effectively sort of summing together loads of different of these activation functions to try and model the true underlying function between input and output. And the activation we're going to focus on today is ReLU, which I think Yang mentioned before. I think he mentioned even the ReLU theorem that ReLU neural networks can model any function up to any required accuracy. And ReLU just simply is, it doesn't map anything. It returns 0 whenever something is below 0, and then returns y equals x above 0. So it's a very simple, it's probably the simplest kind of activation function, simplest kind of nonlinearity you can have. But surprisingly works really well. So yeah, there's some real magic behind neural networks that does make them perform so exceptionally. Extra information we probably need. So yeah, during the fitting process, a optimizer is going to do some work to optimize a loss function. So for us, for regression, the loss function is the common mean squared error. I regress here, and this is just taking the squared difference between the predicted and the true output values, summing over all the test data. So yeah, I should also make a comment that when we have our full data sets, something like this is our full data of, I can write it actually, in and out, in, out. So yeah, we have a long list of paired data of inputs and outputs for this supervised setup, and we want to separate this in randomly sample to make some training and some test data. So yeah, imagine this was sampled randomly, but we're going to approximately, the most common way to separate is a 20% test and an 80% train. So this 20% of the data is taken away and not touched, and 80% is used for training. So here, these paired input output data, the input goes into the network and it gives a predicted output for the, it can be for the output in the regression space. And then it takes the difference between the predicted and the true, the squares over all of the data in the batch used for the training. And then, yeah, this sort of gives you some loss measure, which the optimizer can then update some parameters to change these predicted values to try and minimize it. And the optimizer, the most commonly used one, is something called stochastic gradient descent, or that's the prototypical starter. And as you'd think, it's really performing some gradient descent in this hyperparameter space to try and minimize this. But we're going to use a slightly better one, Adam, which just changes the step size that it will take in this hyperparameter space, dependent on performance improvements. So yeah, this is the optimizer we're going to focus on. For regression, we're going to use this mean squared error. We're going to use the same optimizer for classification. And for classification, we're going to use cross entropy. Sorry, it's not written very nicely, but yeah, cross entropy is going to be our loss. This is then, again, the prototypical standard one. It's sort of based on Kullback-Leibniz divergence. And the idea is it tries to, you have distributions of predicting each class based on the variety of inputs over the input space. And it tries to fit these distributions for each class and separate them as much as possible so they become as independent as possible. That's why it uses this information theory idea as well. So I won't write this out. It's a bit more of an involved function, but it's quite a standard information entropy. So I would recommend look at, if you're really interested to look at the structure, have a look at Kullback-Leibniz divergence as well. It's based on that. Great. I think that's everything related to neural networks I wanted to briefly reintroduce. Yeah, are there any questions at this point? Before I sort of talk about the other architectures quickly. Okay, nice. Cool. Then I'll keep going, talk about some of the other architectures. So we're also going to use some other architectures for classification. So as I said, the neural nets we're going to use for both because they're, very adaptable, tailorable architecture. And we're going to specifically for the classification case, and we're going to look at a binary classification problem. We're going to use a few more architectures. The first is the simplest kind of binary classification architecture called, I should write down for logistic regression. So this is perhaps already familiar. It's sort of effectively just that sigmoid curve that's fit over some higher dimensional space to either predict one on this side and 0 on this side. 0 and 1 as predicted. But it does it in some higher dimensional space. And in fact, the probability of it being 1, I think it's something like this. So for our, something like this. So for our input A's, there's going to be some weights that are going to be trained. So if the input size is, say, 5 vectors, it will be, in our case, there's just going to be 5 parameters here to be trained, and also some normalization constant. So there's really only 6 hyperparameters in this space. So compared to our neural network, it's a much, much simpler architecture. There's almost no parameters to be learned, and it's just going to give an output probability of being 0 or 1. So really simple architecture that will do as well. So as you'd expect, simpler architectures tend to not perform as well as you'd expect, because there's much less sort of space in the space to train to fit some more complicated function. We're also going to then look at support vector machines, which I think, I know Yang's used to be quite a fan of, so he's probably mentioned those already. These take, say, for example, if we had this weight vector again, is going to take it and draw each input data point in some higher dimensional space. So for example, if this was a 5 vector, it could be a 5D space. Each input is a data point, and then it's going to be colored by the output. So for example, if I was to draw some kind of embedding here, and then it's going to draw the 0s in green and the 1s in blue. And then the support vector machine tries to fit some hypersurface in this higher dimensional space that will separate the blues and the greens as well as possible. So it won't always be able to do it perfectly, as you see here, but then it can be used to say this is a 0 on this side and a 1 on this side of the hypersurface. So it can be used for predicting on later data as well. The final architecture is random forest. So yeah, that's kind of annoying. So random forest. And this uses the idea of decision trees first. So decision tree is effectively, it takes some small amount of the data and then it performs a series of inequalities. So for example, it could be the third entry of the vector is bigger than 5. And then this is a yes or no. And then if it's yes, then it's going to be, and then we can do the first entry is less than or equal to 0. And the, the 5th entry is bigger than 2 or something. And yeah, it's just sort of a decision tree of inequalities. And at the end, it will tell you whether it's 0 or 1 in your classification, what class it's going to be going into. So this is a decision tree. And the random forest, as you think, forest is a collection of trees. So it has a large number of trees trained on different subsets of the data. And then when you when you do your predictions, you put your input into all of those trees, and then you take the most common output of those, whether it's going to tell you whether it's going to be 0 for this tree, 1 for this tree, 0 for that tree. Then 0 is the most common. You're going to say it's going to be output class 0. Yeah, that's probably all for the architectures. Just some other good ML practice. If you end up wanting to look into stuff a bit more, it's good to use cross-validation when doing any machine learning. So this is where we saw earlier, we took some random partition of the data into an 80% and 20%. Well, when you do cross-validation, you do that partition in different ways and then have different copies of the same architecture that you train with the different partitions. And this gives you a variety of the outputs that you can then, a variety of the measures that you can work with. And as well as that, you can also use cross-validation for, hyperparameter tuning. So you want to know how many layers to use, you can do it with different partitions of the data for different numbers of layers, and then you can sort of try and find some optimization based on that as well. The other thing I should have mentioned too is the measures. So yeah, for regression, to measure performance on this test data, we're going to use, again, this mean squared error. So this is going to be some loss, and that's going to give us an evaluation of how well the unseen test data is performing in its predictions as it goes through the trained architecture, whichever we choose. And as well as, although this just gives us some number, so it can be quite hard to see if this is a practical choice. So we're also going to use another one called R squared. And this, as we've seen this formula, so I won't write it again. So, but this is compares the performance of the trained model to some null model that will always predict the mean. So for your input data, there's going to be some mean value. You could always predict the mean. That'd be the sort of the null, most obvious thing to do, but obviously that's going to not perform particularly well. So we also then compare how well does this trained architecture, say for example, the neural net, predict. If it's predicting a lot closer, then this is going to be small, and this R squared value is going to be close to 1. If it's predicting just as well, this will be 1, and the R squared will be 0, and it can perform a lot worse, in which case it's unbounded below. So we want R squared close to 1 for good performance, and gives us a bit more of an idea of how this performance is doing. For classification, we're going to use confusion matrices. So again, we're putting stuff into classes. In our case, we're just looking at binary. So if the, for example, the column is the true class and the row is the predicted class, then you effectively have some matrix. For us, it's just going to be 2 by 2, but it can obviously generalize nicely to higher dimensions. And yeah, you go through the test data, and each time if this particular input in the test data has true class 0, but is predicted to be in class 1, then we know it's true, it's predicted to be 1. So we add 1 to this entry of the matrix. And we do this across all the test data and then later normalize. And this gives us some counts, some ratios in a matrix that will all sum to 1. So obviously then the closer this is to an identity matrix, i.e. is predicting to be the same as the true class, the better the performance is. And in fact, we can then use standard accuracy, which is just going to be equal to the sum of the confusion matrix diagonal, so the trace. And this is going to be close to 1 for perfect performance. It's perfectly predicting over all the test data. It really is just the proportion of the test data that is correctly predicted to the true class, because it's everything that'll be on the diagonal. Great, so then, so that's everything about the machine learning I wanted to reintroduce. Are there any questions about the architectures we've looked at there? Before I just quickly refresh the weighted predictive space data that we're going to be working with. Okay, nice. I assume that's okay up to now. Hopefully that's clear. So now we're going to be looking at a particular set of data based on weighted projective spaces. So as I said briefly earlier, these very nicely come from the Shaka database online, and really would recommend having a look at this database. They have a long list of a very nice setup of data of the polytopes that represent calibre hours and etc. But we're taking it from them, so big credit to them. And what they've done is they provided us with a list of weights. So there's very interesting, specifically only 7,555 combinations of 5 vectors of weights. Of 5 vectors of weights, so literally integer, co-prime, positive numbers. That's that then can define weighted projective spaces. So because it's weighted, it becomes a 4D space. And this is literally like the complex coordinates that define the space originally. These just become identified to like this. So depending on the weights, this changes sort of the polynomial equation that is going to be fully identified along in this full. So this is obviously C5, and then we perform this identification for all lambda, and then this is going to reduce down to a complex projective P4 space. So yeah, these define the spaces, and it turns out there's only 7,555 of them that have within them some Calabi-Yau threefold hypersurface. And pretty cool. This data also gives us the two non-trivial Hodge numbers for that data. So I saw Yang had some Hodge diamonds in his data set. So let me just write out the. So obviously it's quite easy to reduce the Hodge diamonds using the sort of Serre-duality and complex conjugation rules about it. So this is the Hodge diamond for the information about the Calabi-Yau threefolds. And as we see here, there's only two non-trivial ones, either 0, 1, or just the same repeated. So that's why we have a database of weights that define the projective space and Hodge numbers of the hypersurface within it. So they're quite disconnected, and constructing the equation for the hypersurface is quite an involved process. I recommend there's some nice papers by Candelas, etc., that talk about going through this construction, but we won't do that because that's not really that's a bit of a waste of time for us. We're going to be machine learning, so we're going to be jumping from these weights all through that construction process straight to these Hodge numbers. So it really is quite impressive. And then the final thing I should also say, as well as learning these Hodge numbers, you can also define the Euler number, which is just some simple linear combination of these Hodge numbers. So our regression problem is we're going to input the weights, and we're going to be trying to learn each of the Hodge numbers or the Euler number. And then regress is going to be this vector of weights going to say H11 or H21 or Euler number. And our classification problem, as I said, was going to be binary. This is going to be input of weights, and it's just going to be going to 0 or 1. And this is the scenario where the Euler number is going to be positive or negative. I can put one of them, put greater than or equal to 0. Something like this. So we're trying to, from just the information of the projective space weights, trying to learn, is the Calabi-Yau hypersurface's Euler number positive or negative? So that's just the simple binary classification problem we'll set up that we're going to be using to exemplify. So yeah, I'm now going to go on to running through the spider script. Are there any last questions before we go on to that would be easier to look at with the tablet? Okay, great. So yeah, let's go through and work through this. So this is the script we had from before. As we said, we've imported all of the additional functions we need and the additional packages. We've then imported our data. So this is the functionality for importing data. And then here we're going to do our regression. So just in this one cell alone, we're going to do the whole regression problem. So first of all, we assign our input and output data. Input I've called X, output is just going to be the Y. So our input is going to be the 5 vectors of weights each time, and the output, we're going to use this array slicing from before, and we're just going to output the first non-trivial Hodge number, H11. That's then our full input and output data all paired up or co-aligned, and then what we're going to do is perform some train test splitting. There's a functionality for that in scikit-learn, and we can seed it to sort of set it to be a random selection with this seeding choice. So that sets up our test and train data from our input and output. Then we go on to build our neural network. So here we've used a specific regressor architecture. This is the functionality for that. We've picked layers like this. So it's an input layer, and then it's a hidden layer of 32 neurons, and then one of 64, then one of 32. So with all these connections, this is a very large number of hyperparameters, and each of these neurons uses ReLU activation. We have that Adam solver, and it automatically assumes the mean squared error loss for this MLP setup. So if you want to use a more complicated loss, then this is where we would step into starting using TensorFlow, for example, or something else, because this function's a bit more limited. So yeah, pretty simple. Just this function alone has set up all of the architecture for us, all of those neurons. So you can see why it's good to use for starting with. And then the function .fit literally does all of the fitting process for us as well. So it's an incredibly easy package to be using for machine learning. So this has created the network, it's done the training for us. So we've got now our trained neural network function that's fitted to predict first Hodge number from input from the weights of the projective space the Calabi-Yau is embedded in. And then we want to evaluate how well it does. So we use the separated out test data that hasn't been seen before. We predict on it, and then we compare the mean squared error and this R squared value between the predicted value and the test value. So I'm just going to run this, and you can see it does 20 iterations. So it just sees the data 20 times to improve its performance. And this is now our evaluation. So this mean squared error is 248 here. So, lower than what it started at when it first started training, but you can see the test data is slightly higher than the trained data. This warning is just to say we could iterate more and it would perform better. But yeah, we're only not looking to rush. So there's no need for us to wait too long to do that. So we won't bother. But here the R squared is something a bit more tangible. We said 1 was perfect prediction. So it's 0.95. So 95% of the time it's predicting, or it's predicting to within this sort of level of confidence effectively, to a very high performance. So this is very close to 1. So we're getting very good learning. And you can see we're getting very good learning very early on. So this, yeah, again, this is a very nice result for our regression problem. You can very quickly learn this first Hodge number. If I wanted, I could change this quite quickly to make it the second Hodge number. We rerun the problem, it does the same thing. And here we now have slightly worse performance. It's now like around 0.92. So slightly further from 1, but still over 0.9. So still a very good performance for the learning for such a quick setup. So that's our regression problem. Yeah, I've sent this code. I'll give it to the school organizers too. So if you end up wanting to have a go at machine learning on something yourself, you can just change the data you input. You can change the X and Y here as you like and slice as you like, and then keep all the rest of the code the same, and it will do all of that setup for you. So yeah, there's hopefully some nice code for you to use, just copy and paste into for some regression learning where you want to do it on whatever data set you end up working with. So now we can look at some classification. So we're specifically doing binary classification. The inputs are going to be the same, the weights, and the outputs are now going to be either 1 if the Euler number is positive, and 0 if the Euler number is non-negative. So yeah, I've just used a for loop here to set it up. And if you want to do your own classification, you could do some own way of designing your class allocations of some simple integer numbers. So here it's just 0 and 1. For this binary classification, we do the same splitting. Here we're going to use now an MLP classifier. So now it's classifier instead of regressor. The loss function is going to be different. Again, it's going to assume this cross entropy loss, which you can make more complicated ones, TensorFlow, but again, we're using the simplest style. We use the same layer structure, the same ReLU, the same optimizer. So it's really exactly the same kind of architecture as before, but now it's training to do classification. Again, it's simple training and simple evaluation on the unseen test data. But now when we evaluate, we're going to use this confusion matrix, and then we're going to take the sum of the diagonals to give us our accuracy as well. So see how well a neural network can learn from input weights to know whether the Euler number of the Calabi-Yau hypersurface is positive or not. So running this, we get a accuracy of 91%. So again, a really nice performance for such a simple architecture, or such a small amount of code. So with 92% of the time, is correctly recognizing whether the weights that define a projective space will have a Calabi-Yau hypersurface with positive or non-positive, positive or non-positive Euler number. And here's this confusion matrix. So you see these are the this is the probability of it being, this is of it being non-positive, and this is of it being positive. And then here the sort of type 1 and type 2 errors as such, if you're familiar with the statistics for that. So this confusion matrix is a nice measure. There's other functions over confusion matrix which can give you other measures, but accuracy, the sum of the diagonal, is the most standard. And here we're seeing good performance for this classifier. So sorry, go ahead.
So there's some question in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I haven't been looking at that. Oh yeah, nice. So this is asking about choosing the layer sizes, because obviously it's quite easy to tailor here. And yes, the layer sizes do change performance. There's some work on what's called the double descent curve. So here, this is based on the number of hyperparameters versus performance. And for a low number of hyperparameters relative to the number of degrees of freedom of your input, if the number of parameters is significantly lower or significantly higher, then performance is improved. So it's kind of quite an unusual behavior. So either you don't really want to have the same number of hyperparameters as your degrees of freedom, but if you have less, then you're doing some dimensional reduction on your space to learn some sort of underlying core behavior. And if you have a lot more, then you have a much larger hyperparameter space that you can do a lot more good tuning in to try and get a really perfect function. So I tend to err on the side of many more hyperparameters. So and then once you're sort of an order of magnitude or a couple orders of magnitude higher in your parameter space, then varying it slightly from there doesn't really change the performance very much. Maybe you'll get up to a 1% change in your measures, your output measures for performance. So really, I just try and make sure at least that the number of hyperparameters is a lot larger than the input size. But other than that, you can do tuning if you want to make it perfect. But performance is usually quite a small change from there. But very good question about that. Are there any other questions as well at this time?
I just wanted to say that people can unmute and ask. There's an unmute permission has been given, just in case the audience didn't know. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll keep going for now then. So there's only a couple more architectures to look at. So we've done our neural networks for regression. We've done our neural networks for binary classification. And now we're going to look at our other binary classification architectures. The first was this logistic regressor. So again, we can just, all this setup of data is the same because it's the same problem effectively, but our architecture is going to change. So here we have architecture like this. This toll tolerance is just some information about the training, like how much do we need in performance to be improving where we stop training. So I've set it to be quite high. You really want it to be some small fraction usually, but we're not really worried about that at the moment. And then this C value is related to regularization. If it's a low C value, then effectively what you're trying to do is keep all the weights quite small, or all of the weights of your logistic regressor quite small, these parameters, because obviously there's this normalization constant, you can let them all grow massive and as well as the constant, and then they'll all be big numbers, and it's effectively exactly the same performance as them all being small. So you have this sort of regularizer to try and keep them around a sensible order of magnitude for the computer to do easy calculation. And we haven't really bothered about that. You can make it less than 1 if you really care about it, but I'm not really fussed. We just want good performance without having to worry about that. And then, same as before, we're going to do the same predictions, same measures of performance on the test data, feed the input test data into the logistic regressor, it's going to output 0 or 1, and then we're going to create this confusion matrix and see how often is it correctly predicting this 0 or 1. So let's run this. Again, it's super quick because it's such a quick architecture, such a simple architecture to train. And here we're getting 90%, so slightly worse than the classifier, the neural network, but still very good performance. So you can see this problem predicting Hodge numbers, or sorry, predicting positivity of Euler number, obviously has some kind of fundamental background that makes this problem quite easy to approximate, because such a simple architecture can perform so well. So this was sort of conclusion to do a bit of a self-plug. In the paper we did here, also cited on some work with Yang and also Professor David Berman too. And here we've done some machine learning to look at this, why this is so easy to compute, and we've done some unsupervised architecture on that as well. So if you want to have a look into this data a bit more, you're interested why this performs so well, you can have a look at that paper too. But anyway, yeah, back to this problem we're looking at now. So we see we can 90% of the time use this simple logistic regressor with few hyperparameters to predict the outputs very well. Then we can move on to the support vector machine architecture. So this is, again, we have this 5D space, and it's going to find some hypersurface that will separate them. We're going to use a linear hypersurface based on this kernel choice of linear. You can make it to be some more complicated if you want. You can make it some more complicated hypersurface by using what's called the kernel trick, and it does some more complicated embedding in some high dimensional space. But we're not going to worry about that. Again, we're sticking to simple linear structure, linear hypersurface. And again, we have a similar regularization problem with this C. But again, it doesn't matter too much. For this case, we're just doing our first port of call, our first assessment of performance, and then the same prediction setup, same confusion matrix and accuracy evaluation. This one takes a bit longer to train because it's obviously working in a higher dimensional space, so it's a bit slower than before. And again, we get a very good performance, marginally worse than the logistic regressor, but still around 90%. So again, it's finding a pretty good hypersurface that can really separate this information out very nicely. Yeah, was there anything else about? I think that's, yeah, for support vector machine. And then our final architecture we look at is this random forest. So it's this collection of decision trees. And again, we have the same data setup we're doing all the way through. And that's what's really nice about scikit-learn, is that we can really use consistent setups. So it's really easy to just copy code. And again, we just use .fit each time for each of the architectures, and .predict as well. And we can use these same confusion matrix functions and accuracy evaluation very easily. So we're going to do this, train and test our random forest, which it does very quickly. It performs slightly worse. Again, here we get 87%. If you want, you can change your seeding for the data or for the random initialization of the random forest. For all the way throughout, we can change these seedings, but they should be marginal changes based on this setup. So anyway, that's kind of everything I wanted to cover today. So hopefully you have that from this script, as well as the data from the chat. And as I said, I'll send this to the organizers too. Hopefully they wouldn't mind putting it on the schedule website for KAWS, and then you can download that, keep it in your back pocket for wherever you're on you're on a project that has a nice data set, and you think, oh, why don't I just quickly run it through some supervised machine learning architectures? You can do that, and then you get a nice little extra result to add into your paper that we've done some data analysis to on the project that we're working with. And if you do end up using it, please drop us a citation too. Obviously, nice to help each other else that way. So yeah, that pretty much concludes everything I wanted to say. Hopefully that was useful, and you get sort of a nice tangible experience of what you're doing on the machine learning front, and a nice intro to this simple package, scikit-learn. So yeah, if there are any final questions, otherwise, please fire away now. Otherwise, I'll pass on to Jiakang, who has a lovely problem sheet of problems to talk through as well.
Yeah, so we will upload this file. If you could just mail it to us, we will do that.
Yes, nice.
So are there any questions for Hirst before we move on to the second half? Okay, I don't see any other questions. So then, like, let us thank Hirst for his tutorials. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Right. So yeah, thanks Ed for giving such a nice introduction to Python and also a very nice example on calabi hypersurfaces. So yeah, so in my part, I will maybe just be very brief on coding and just discuss some applications with some examples. So if you check the website of the school, there is a zip file and with 2 data sets and the problem sheet. So I'll mainly discuss the 2 questions on problem sheet. Yeah, so anyway, I'll just read the questions first. So the first one is about lattice polytopes. So essentially they are just yeah, and also if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and stop me, and also I will try to keep an eye on the chat. Yeah. So the first one is about lattice polytopes, which essentially are just convex polytopes with vertices in some lattice, which usually will take the lattice, well, just to be Zn, and these polytopes can be used to construct local Calabi-Yau. I mean, here it's n, so usually it's n+1 folds of complex dimension n+1. Or more precisely, they should be called Grunstein singularities. But anyway, we'll just call it Calabi-Yau, and they're all non-compact because of the construction. Yeah, but we'll not worry about the detailed constructions. Rather, we'll just discuss some like properties or features from these polytopes, and so here we'll focus. Well, first we'll focus on like basically the easiest non-trivial case, which is n equal to 2. These are the lattice polygons, so like this one. I mean, and any like convex polygons you like. So maybe like this one, or maybe like more complicated, like maybe this one. As long as all the vertices are on the lattice. So yeah, so like well, maybe let's remove these 2. Like this one, this corresponds to the threefold, which is essentially C3. Well, if you like, it's a cone over S5, your 5 sphere, and usually like if you have a stack of like say in type 2b, if you have a stack of D3 branes probing this Calabi-Yau toric Calabi-Yau, then you'll get some 4D n equal to 1 gauge theory. Like here C3, you'll just get super Mills. Yeah, but anyway, we'll not discuss this here. So in part A, we'll focus on something called Earhart polynomial and Earhart series. So given a polynomial in the lattice, we can write the Earhart polynomial, which is this. For some lattice polytope P, we can write it as the Earhart polynomial in terms of a variable K, which is essentially the number of points intersecting, I mean, of this polytope on the lattice, and K is the K dilation. So like here, well, we have an example here. So we have an example in the question, which is 1, 0, 0, 1, and -1, -1. If we take this to be the origin, then we have convex polygon on the lattice looks like this. So K here means the K dilation, i.e. here, this is the original one, which is K equal to 1. So we have 4 points, meaning this is equal to the Earhart of P at K equal to 1. And of course, we have a trivial one, which is K equal to 0. This is just a point. So the Earhart polynomial will just be 1. Then you can consider, the dilation or the larger size, like this one here. If I can change the color. When K is equal to 2, we'll have this. Still of the same shape, but it's a bit larger, and now we can count the number of points. So we have 1, 2, 3. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, meaning the Earhart when K is equal to 2 is 10. Then you can try like even larger, like when K is equal to 3. Well, it's like this, of course. And you can check when K is 3, the Earhart is equal to 19, and then you can just go up. So yeah, so also in the question, it also introduces another series generating function called the Earhart series. So namely, well, because it's a generating function, so we have a formal variable t, and it generates all the Earhart polynomials, which looks like this, t to the power k. So for example, we can compute the Earhart series for this lattice polygon. We just need to compute all these Earhart polynomials as the coefficients at each order for the Earhart series. So like here, I mean, if you just like, I guess like 3 examples should be enough, and if you like draw more polytopes with larger and larger polytopes, you can find, like, say at Earhart P, the polynomial at order k, you can find it's equal to Earhart P k minus 1 plus 3k. So essentially, it's like when k is equal to 2, this blue big polygon contains the original black one, so it contains these 4 lattice points, which is this Earhart k minus 1, and you also have these on the boundaries, these lattice points on the boundaries, and you can find it's 3k. Right, so you can just go on, write it as, well, I guess everyone can do this. It's just k minus 2 plus 3k plus 1 plus 3k. Then you just keep doing this, and you'll find it's Earhart P at 0 plus 3 plus up to 3k. Namely, it's 1 plus 3 times 1 plus 2 up to k. Well, this is just 1 plus 3 halves k, is k times 1. Therefore, we know the Earhart series is just this. So we have a sum, which is k from 0 to infinity, and the coefficients are just 3 halves k squared plus 3 halves k plus 1 times t to the power k. So actually, you can write it as in a more compact form. If you just say use Mathematica, so you can find this sum is actually, so let me write it better. It's just equal to 1 plus t squared over 1 minus t cubed. So this is your Hertz series, and we'll discuss why we care about. I mean, why it's also useful in mathematics and physics. But now in this question, it also asks why. What is the area of P? So what is the area of this original polygon? And well, it's just 3/2 because I mean it has 3 little simplices. Each one is half of area half, so it's 3/2. And already here, well, maybe you can find here, this is the Hertz polynomial, and it has coefficients at leading order. The coefficient is 3/2, and here the area is 3/2. And this is not a coincidence. In fact, this is in general true. And also you can find here, this is the power in the denominator is 1. I mean, it's just 1 minus t to the power 3. So this 3 indicates the dimension of your Calabi-Yau threefold. Namely, it's just Calabi-Yau threefold. So, or if you like to think of this in terms of the polytopes, this 3 is equal to d plus 1 for d-dimensional polytopes. So if you have a like a polyhedron, like something like I don't like maybe like this, then you'll find it's the Hertz series. In the denominator, it will be of order 4. So in part B, we have another example, but now this is it says first we need to know what a polar dual of a lattice polytope is, which is defined like this. Well, denoted as this. Essentially, it's all the vectors satisfying this inequality for any u in the polytope. So like here, in our example in part A, we have this polygon. We have 3 vertices and 1 interior point. So often we take, because it has only 1 interior point, we often take this to be the origin. So we have 3 vertices giving like 3 vectors. Essentially are the coordinates 1, 0, 0, 1, -1, -1. So we check like for 1, 0, those vectors satisfying this inequality will ending on this line here, because it's this one. So, and likewise for 0, 1, all the vectors, all the v vectors will ending on this line. And likewise for -1, -1, our last vertex, all the v's will ending on this. So we'll have they'll just enclose this region, which is the dual polytope. So let me draw it here. This is the dual polytope. So it still has 1 interior point, and now it has again 3 vertices, but also has some other boundary points on the edges here. So now we can also compute its Hertz series. I'm not go through the details, but again, we just first compute the Hertz polynomial, which looks like this, and now it's quite similar to what we did before, like here, like this, but now it just becomes 1 plus 9 times 1 plus up to k. If you do the same counting, then you find it's this. And also you can use, say, Mathematica or any tricks to compute the Hertz polynomial P duo, sorry, Earhart series, and you'll find it's 1 plus 7t plus t squared divided by 1 minus t cubed. So again here, the denominator has power 3 because this is a two-dimensional polygon and it corresponds to a Calabi-Yau field, non-compact Calabi-Yau field. And also we can check its area. Well, this is 9/2. Again, the same as the leading order coefficients in the Earhart polynomial. And also another thing is we can find here the leading order is in your Earhart polynomial is k squared, and this one is also k squared because this is a 2D polygon. So if you have like this one 3D polyhedra, you will find the leading order will just be the volume of P times k to the power power 3. So in general, for any dimensions, it's also the volume of P times k to the power d. Right, and also another interesting feature of Earhart series is if you check the numerators. So let's just take the numerator. So here it's 1 plus t squared, and let's take t equal to 1. This will just be 3. Here, 1 plus 7t plus t squared. Again, take t equal to 1, we'll find this is 9. Here's 3, here's 3 halves, it's 9 and 9 halves. So essentially, if we have, in general, for any dimension, if we have a Earhart polynomial, sorry, Earhart series, which looks like this, G0 plus G1t plus up to, well, G, let's say dTd over 1 minus t to the d plus 1. Then we'll find the sum of gi, well, of course, from 0 to d, will equal to d factorial times the volume of your polytope. And usually we'll call this the normalized volume, and we'll try to predict this use some regressor. Yeah, so these are some data we can encode use this Earhart polynomial and Earhart series. So part C, well, this is still some discussion on Earhart series rather than using machine learning. So maybe let's just have a very quick discussion. So here it says the Earhart series, well, at least in our cases, for these lattice polytopes, all of them are actually equal to the Hilbert series of the associated Calabi-Yau. So here it will be Calabi-Yau 3. Well, actually, maybe I should write it more explicitly. It should be P duo equal to the Hilbert series for P. So like this one, it will give the Earhart series here would give the Hilbert series for this polygon, and vice versa. So what is Hilbert series? Essentially, of course it's also a generating function, and this would count. So mathematically, it would count the number of invariant polynomials or like holomorphic functions at each degree, and physically it just enumerates your gauge invariant operators at each order. So like the easiest one will be C3. If you check its Hilbert series, it will look like 1 over 1 minus t cubed. And then you do the, well, I mean, then you just do the Taylor expansion and you'll find gives the number. So at order 0, you just have 1, which is trivial. And order 2, and order 1, you have, because it's C3, you have 3 coordinates. It will be Z1, Z2, Z3. So then at order 2, you have like, say, Z1 squared, Z2 squared, Z3 squared, Z1, Z2, Z1, Z3, and Z2, Z3. So if you check the Taylor expansion, you'll get 1 at order 0 corresponds to your trivial constant, and then 3t corresponds to the 3 monomials at order 1, and then you have 6t squared, and then so of course we can have some more refined versions, as we'll see in this question, because here we're gonna compare this Earhart polynomial with the Hilbert series for this polygon, for this Calabi-Yau. So in the question, it says this lattice polygon corresponds to this threefold with action 1, 1, 1. Namely, it's just the most trivial weight you have, which is let's call it omega set I for I equal to 1, 2, 3, and omega we can just take it to be the primitive root such that omega cubed is equal to 1. Then because it says these are the like here the trivial C3 case, these are all the invariant polynomials. So in this case, well, we can just compute by brute force and then find the patterns, which is all the invariant polynomials would have formed like this. Let's go Z1 to the power A1, Z2 to the power A2, Z3 to the power A3, such that A1 plus A2 plus A3 is equal to 0. Of course, mod 3 because it's C3. Then we'll just try to find all the possible monomials of this form and count the numbers. Yeah, maybe I can just write it like. So essentially, it's A1, 2, 3, 0 with A1 plus A2 plus A3 equal to 0 mod 3 and up to infinity, and this is like the refined Hilbert series. So here it will look like 1 if you just do the counting. You'll have something like this. Then, as the hint says in the question says, you can consider some map which looks like this. Is Tx1, T2 is equal to x2 over x1, and T3 is equal to T over x2. Then, let's just apply this map, and you'll find at each order they actually give some characters of your SU3 irreps. So let's write like this. So if you check at order 0, of course it's trivially 1. Your coefficient is just 1, and this actually gives the character of your SU3 irrep, which is, well, if you like in the highest weight notation, is 0, 0. Then at order 2, you'll find it looks, actually at order 3, you'll find it looks like this. X2 minus 1 plus x1 minus 1, x2 squared plus 1 plus, you'll see, you'll find the full character in the solutions, and I'll send to the organizers. But anyway, this will be equal to the 10-dimensional irrep of SU3, which is in terms of highest weight notation is this, and this is actually equal to T13 plus T1 squared T2 plus T1 squared T3 plus all these, or the three terms here. So we can just keep doing this and find some pattern. Yeah, someone's asking where does this SU3 come from? Yeah, so I'll explain this in a moment. Just let me first write down the expression of SU3. Sorry, of the Hilbert series. If you find this pattern, it will become 3K0 T to the power 3K. So then you can just refine it just by setting, well, of course, yeah, just unrefine it by setting all these x1, x2 equal to 1. Just keep your dummy variable t. Then you'll find this is essentially because these are irreps, so this is just a dimension. And indeed, we can check the dimension here. This is 1, this is 10, and if we check the next order, it will be 28. Well, anyway, this is just 1, 10, 28, and if you check the expansion for this one, namely, you just plug in different case, you'll find these are just 1, 10, 28. So, and indeed, if you use just use your knowledge in representation theory, compute this general expression for the dimension of this these irreps of this form. And then you can check this is indeed well, it's almost the same. I mean, essentially it's the same, because then you can just redefine your variable t cubed, redefine it as t, so you have 1 plus 7t plus t, sorry, squared divided by 1 minus t cubed, and this is exactly the same as this one here. Right, so there are actually 2 other different methods. Different methods. So you can use these 2 different other. You have 2 other different methods to compute the Hilbert series, but I'm not going to discuss it here. But one is I think one is given in the reference, which you can find. So it's the, let's see. Yeah, it should be this paper by Yang and Rakunson and Yao. Well, 17. I mean, it's in the reference. So they directly use this lattice polygon to compute the Hilbert series, and essentially just construct some fans of it, and then you can just use the combinatorial data to compute the Hilbert series, and they have this theorem cited from some mathematical literature, and you can just check and they will give the same results. And the other one is using Molian Y integrals, which is more complicated, which I personally don't use that method often, but it's more general in some sense, because you can compute essentially any three folds, even if that's not Calabi-Yau, that's not toric. You can also perform similar computations for the moduli space. Yeah. If you like, you can check this paper by again Son and also Nani, which is okay. It should be this one. They discuss all the so-called reflexive polygons and compute their Hilbert series. Basically using Molian wire integral and right. So yeah, and you can find all the Hilbert series of these using that integral. And so now let's explain why we have this SU3. So yeah, actually it's a very good question because so here SU3 is not a, well, I didn't write this SU3 down here, but SU3 is not coincidence here because essentially all these, if you check the other examples, I can't remember, maybe also this one, the color bill for this one. If you check all these, they are all of this form, C3 over G, quotiented by G, and this G is some finite discrete group of SU3. So this yeah, this somehow explains why you have this SU3 coefficients, these IRAPs. But there might be some deeper reasons, but I'm not sure. But anyway, if you are interested, you can check this paper. I think I also give it in the reference. Yeah, it should be this paper given by Benvenuti, Feng, and also Nani and Yang. It's in the reference list, so you can find it. And they discuss some like why you have SU3 and I can't remember what they how they call this. Some, oh yeah, I think it's called like some Valentina group. Then you can check that's some subgroup Valentina group. You also have your SU3 IRAPs, and they'll give they have this explicit example, which is that's Valentina group, and you'll find the Hilbert series like this also. It's like some Heisenberg group for 3 elements. It's also a discrete subgroup of SU3. Right. So yeah. Anyway, that's why we care about. Well, partly explains why we care about a hot series and Hilbert series in like mathematics and physics. So now let's move on to the machine learning part. As we have mentioned, this gives the hot series, which is of this form. It encodes the number, your dimension here and also here of your polytope, and of course your Calabi-Yau threefold, Calabi-Yau D+1 fold. But in general, well, like here, because it's such a simple example, we can just do this analytically and then find the closed form. So well, actually I cheated here because I also used Mathematica to compute this closed form. So in general, we may not have this, kind of, or sometimes we don't bother computing this general form, this closed form. So we can just use the Taylor expansion, which are, well, like these coefficients 0, 1, 1, 4, 10, 19, we just use this Taylor expansion, use the coefficients, and we can try to use some neural network to predict the dimension encoded here. So in the chat, this phenomenon happened for other toric varieties. Not always, but sometimes this will also happen. Well, actually, I think I'm not 100% sure, but if you check the ADE singularities, these are some subgroups of SU2, and if you check these Hilbert series, of course, some refinements of the Hilbert series, you can also find these SU2 characters. So yeah, if there is some subgroups which is of like say some your SU group or any like even maybe other like SO like orthosymplectic groups, I think you can also find some refined version of the Hilbert series whose coefficients have these kind of irreps, characters of the irreps. But of course, it depends on how you, I mean, because the non-trivial part is this, because like here, we just do it by, brute force, just by counting these monomials, and then we use this map to find these characters. So of course you can write it as some coefficients, the coefficients as the characters, but usually the non-trivial part is to find such map. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, if you like, we can also discuss after the story. Right. So now we have yeah, back to the machine learning problem. So we'll have two data files. One is a database file which is called data.db, and it has some randomly generated polytopes with columns called hilb, dim, and degree. So hilb, these are just your hat, which is essentially 1 plus let's go C1t plus C2t squared plus the dot. And here in the database, we give it up to order 30. And what we don't have the higher orders of this. Then well, let me just write it as C0, C1, C30. So this all these coefficients are given as vector embedded in R31, which as well as your input vector in our machine learning problem. And then we have two other columns. One is dimension. Well, this is just dimension D, and we also have something called degree, but well, it's just some naming. So when we name it degree, but essentially it's the volume, or if you like, it's the normalized volume. Of your polytope. So we have these two pieces of data we would like to predict using some neural network or some machine learning model. So I'm not going to show you the, well, I'm not show you I'm not going to type any codes, but maybe I just, well, let me just be a lazy bones and show you the screenshots of the Python codes. So right, so Ed has shown you the how to use Spider, and this screenshot is basically the UI of Jupyter, and here we just use neural network, which is also called which is essentially a multi-layer perceptron, MLP, when you use scikit-learn, and we just use the this long vector as input, and our output will be the dimension. So in the data we provide the polytopes of dimension 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up to 6. So we only have like 6 different outputs. So it will be and of course these are all integers, so it will be a good choice to use a classifier. So here we just call these are just, oh sorry, we just call here we just code libraries like from scikit-learn, like the MLP classifier, and this just split the data set into training and test set. So anyway, we're just reading the file from reading the data from the database and use this train test split. Then we just build some MLP classifier. Well, at least the screenshots will be in the solutions on the website. So you can just check this again after the tutorial. And then you just use this this classifier, this model to predict, to validate on your test data set. Then you can check like the mean square error 0, accuracy is 100%. This is sort of usually you won't have this good result. I mean, usually it cannot be like always 100% accurate, but here it's because it's a particularly simple problem. So it can reach 100% accuracy. And if you like, you can also try random forest. You just change, because scikit-learn has a rather simple function. You can just use this random forest classifier, and again you can find the accuracy is 100%. And also you can use like say support vector machine, which is SVC because it's classified, and again you can find the accuracy is 100%. But the thing we should really care about is not just, we should not only just be satisfied with the 100% accuracy, because well, unlike people solving these kind of problems, or even unlike use computer to do this calculation rigorously, machine learning is just like fitting some data, so we don't know. So we need to have some at least some satisfying explanations which tells us why this machine could give such a good result. So well, roughly speaking, I'll just do it briefly, but I'll send the solutions to the organizers. So essentially we have this input, and our output will be the dimension of your polytope, which could be from 1 to 6. So well, let's just consider a sequence. In general, I'll call it Y0, Y1, Y2. Then we can define something called forward difference. Forward difference, which is defined by this delta. Let's call it, it's essentially something like delta I, or maybe I shouldn't call it I. I'm going to use that. Maybe let's call it delta KYI, delta 1 Y. So such that delta 1 YI would be YI plus 1 minus YI. Delta 2 YI would be defined as delta 1 YI plus 1 minus delta 1 YI. So etc. So if you can think of why it's called forward difference, is some you can draw a diagram like this. So these two would give you delta 1 Y0. These two would give you delta 1 Y1, and these two would give you delta 2 Y0, and you can go up to any order you like. So there is a claim. Now I'm gonna give you a claim, which is this. So this forward difference, delta K, for any Ym in your sequence, it will be equal to the sum from I from 0 to K. The coefficient will be K choose I minus 1 to the I, Y K plus M minus I. So yeah, I don't have time to give you the proof here, but I've written it in the solutions, and you can just prove this by induction, and use some properties of binomial coefficients and some tricks of it should be very straightforward. But here we'll just care about when M is equal to 0. So this is just gone 0. We'll use this identity here and another theorem, which is also given. The paper is also given in the is also cited in the problem sheet. So you can check. There is a theorem which says for P of dimension, let's go dimension M. So we have this identity, well, this inequality, which is the Earhart for 0, and delta K is greater than or equal to NK, n choose K, which is of course positive. And of course it's for K less than or equal to N. So when K is greater than N, this will be 0. So this is the theorem in that in that paper we cited in the problem sheet. This means the dimension of your polytope will just be the max of K delta K P0 is positive, which is also equal to the minimum of K, where this forward difference vanishes, of course, -1. So this gives the dimension. So like back to our problem, we have the input, which is a sequence. So here, let's I'll call it X, which is Earhart P0 up to Earhart P30. Then we can consider some linear function, which sends your vector, this vector here, to the forward difference we just discussed. And this is essentially some I equal to 0 to K choose I minus 1I, Earhart P, K minus I. Then we can consider the space, which is we can consider such linear subspace defined as the intersection of the kernels of these Fk. Then these are just some linear subspace, and you can check this is just following this relation. They are all linear subspaces in your R31 in your input vector space. And then so we can see, like, if we have X, which is in VL, but it's not in VL, VL plus 1, then we can check delta L at Earhart P of 0 is 0 and Earhart L minus 1, delta L minus 1 will be positive, namely the dimension will be L minus 1. So essentially, just like you have this R31 vector space, and then you have some point which is V0, essentially, because it's essentially delta 0 Earhart P0 is equal to, let's go maybe just, well, it's essentially Earhart P of 0, which is 1, because it's the first coefficient is always 1. So this is V0. Then you have vector space called, which is V1, essentially gives delta 1 of your X0, where this is X0. Then you have a two-dimensional space, V2, which is essentially this. Actually, maybe I should write this because it's two-dimensional. Because these two are the non-trivial forward differences. All the others will vanish. So essentially, all the one-dimensional data points in our data set will live on this one-dimensional line, and two-dimensional ones will be here. Then you have three-dimensional, four-dimensional, up to six-dimensional polytopes. So So this is roughly this is how the machine learning model classifies these different polytopes. And also well, we can also predict the volume or normalize the volume, because the volume could be, you know, non-integer numbers. So like this one is like a half, but the normalized one would be 1. So we'll just use these integers as the output. So essentially, of an n-dimensional, it will be n factorial of times the volume as the output. And now in the data sets, if you check the this normalized volume would range from 1 to some crazy number, which is 6774719. So, well, meaning it doesn't really make sense to use a classifier. So let's use use some regression. Unfortunately, linear regression will do the job. Let's see, where is it? like here. So here we just use and here actually we use 6 different regressors, 1 for each dimension, and then we find the accuracy for predicting this normalized volume is again always 100%, again because it's a rather simple problem here. But if you check the coefficients in your regressor, you find for each dimension you get these coefficients. This is -1, 1. This is 1 - 2, 1. All these are the binomial coefficients. So this actually explains why we have such a good result, because if you check because remember we have this hot p to 0, which is equal to this -1 to the I, and you have hot p k minus I, and already we can see we have this binomial coefficients here, and we can write it as this -1 to the I. Well, this is just using the definition of your Hertz polynomial. Then again, I don't have time to prove it here, but you can check this n choose I -1 I k minus, sorry, it should be n minus here to the power k is 0 for k less than n, and you'll see the proof in the solutions. But then this would only give the only non-trivial term, which is this one. All the lower terms will vanish. So then you'll have this I equal to 0, k choose I -1 I cn k minus I to the power 1 to the power n, and then you just use a similar trick for proving this identity. I mean, you have a similar trick. Essentially, just apply some operator like this, n times to this thing here, and you can check I mean, then you just do the expansion, and you have these binomial coefficients, and you can check this will lead to this equal to n factorial Cn, which is the normalized volume of a polytope. So that's why we have this binomial, and also in the regressor, if you check the coefficients in the regressor, you can also have these binomial coefficients. So in the last 10 minutes, so yeah, unfortunately we only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to discuss another question in the sheet, which is called amoeba. Essentially, it's defined So again, we have this Newton. Well, we have this. So we have this maybe like this polygon or any polygon like this. Then we can associate a Laurent polynomial in two variables. So like here, because this point is 1, 0, so we associate z. This is 0, 1. We'll associate w. This is -1, -1. So we'll associate z -1, w -1. So we can write the Newton, the Laurent polynomial, which is so-called Newton polynomial, like this. And of course, we have an interior point, which is 0, 0. So we can write a C4. This will be some Laurent polynomial of two variables, and these C's are undetermined variables or undetermined coefficients. And like also like this one, we can write it as C1Z for this point, plus C2W for this point, plus C3Z -1 for this point, plus C4 W -1 for this point, plus C5 for this point, the origin. So then you have this Laurent polynomial, and we define the amoeba, something called the amoeba. Well, let's just denote as curly A of the polynomial as the set of points log Z log W, such that your polynomial is equal to 0. Essentially, the 0 locus of your Riemann surface, and the points are the sets of points are these logged points. And if you you can plot this using Mathematica and using some like Monte Carlo method, and you can check like for example for this one, you have some the amoeba will look like this. Rough. Well, I'm not very good at drawing this, but roughly it's gonna look like this. Or maybe it could. I mean, this is the region of the amoeba. And if you change the coefficients, these coefficients, if you change it properly, you may find another one like this with the hole inside. But for this example, no matter how you change these coefficients, there are only two possible shapes with some. Well, just by changing these coefficients, you are just deforming these two amoebae. But roughly speaking, well, essentially you only have genus 0 and genus 1, meaning genus means the number of the holes or bounded complementary regions of the amoeba, because it has other 4 unbounded complementary regions. So like for this one here, the amoeba will look like this, and also it may have a hole inside. So this is the region of the amoeba. So I think, I'm not sure which paper proves this, but the number of interior points, like here, it has only 1 interior point. This corresponds to the maximal possible numbers of holes in your amoeba. So here it has only 1 hole. It has only 1 hole because it has only 1 interior point. If you look at this one, it also have some shape look like this, but it will, no matter how you change the coefficient, it will never have a hole inside because it has no interior points. And likewise here, this is also at most genus 1. And if you check if you just like shrink this or retract this amoeba, you can find something like this. You just keep shrinking this, just retract this. You'll get this thing. You'll get 2 straight lines, and here you'll get something like this. And if you check, say this one, this is essentially the dual of your lattice polygon, and also this is also the dual if you just do the retraction, and these are called the spines. These physically these are essentially your PQ5 brane webs. So I've given several papers in the reference, and you can check the physics and basically the physics just behind these amoeba stuff. And there is another thing called alga, which is so because here we're essentially considering mod z, but these are complex variables, so which, well, it's like is and w is equal to w EIT. Then you can also plot ST on your on the plane, and these are called alga, and they also have some implications of physics, but that's related to the brane tilings, but that's not really precise as far as I know. But anyway, the machine learning problem is here just for this example here. We just want to discuss so we just have this coefficients C1, C2, C3, C4, C5 as input, and the output will just be the genus, which could be either 0 or 1 in this particular example. So we just use some classifier, because it only has 2 classes, to predict the genus. Anyway, we can get to very high accuracy, but the thing I want to discuss is something called PCA. It's essentially just project your like here it's a 5-dimensional vector projected down to some lower dimensional vectors. Like here we can project down to a 2-dimensional vector, and then we can just see the distribution, or like how how they distribute on the plane, and check if we can find they follow any like patterns. Maybe we can figure out what pattern it is, maybe we cannot. So like here, this one, it is, you will have different methods. So there is one package called yellow brick, which is really saves my life because I'm a lazy bone, so I don't bother really writing these long codes, to do this PCA. So here, this yellow brick, it has some PCA decomposition and also some other manifold learning. Just you can check, if you Google yellow brick, you can check its webpage, and it has some explanation. Gives something like the so-called multi-dimensional scaling projection, and you'll find the similar plots. So essentially here we have this C0 up to C5, and we project it down to XY, a 2-dimensional vector. Then the 2-dimensional vectors with different genus will distribute like this. So indeed we can find some patterns. So essentially, if I think, yeah, it's also given in the question, part D, because when G is 0, it's when C5 it satisfies this inequality, and when it's C5 greater than this right-hand side, you will have genus equal to 1. So right, so if you check this, essentially it's something like this. You have C5 here, and you have this right-hand side here. Then you just have the 2 different type classes will be separated like here and also here. I mean, just like this diagram here, but of course you find you have a shift here, because these 2 lines have been shifted to this place. I mean, it's not, they do not intersect at some origin here. Well, this is because this right-hand side is really a non-trivial expression. I mean, it has because your neural network essentially has this linear structure, but here it has like power square roots, so it can only approximate these square roots. And if you check question part G in this question, you'll find if we use this MDS projected vector xy, so here we can plot this x against C5. So maybe you can see this is x, this is C5. Then if we plot this, we can find indeed this x essentially agrees with C5. So here this red line is x equal to C5, and we see all the points are just distributed along this line. And here this y is a bit non-trivial because it corresponds to this thing here. But again, you can try some fitting. So essentially you can just first like use the Mathematica to fit your data in terms of C1, 2, 3, 4, and then you can check this here. This is essentially right hand side minus y fits. Of course, take the ABS, and here this is 2y. Then you can find they also lie along this 45-degree line. But of course, this has distributed like this, and it's because of this non-trivial square root here. So it's slightly harder to get this plot for compared to this one here. But yeah, anyway, the trick, there is another thing you need to use here, which is essentially because, well, I'm not giving you the details, but essentially it's like C1, C3, take the square roots. We can approximate by 0.1 C1, C3 plus 1.2. And if you use this to fit y, you can find this plot here. So essentially, yeah, and you can also use because as we said, also I'd mentioned this, you have your input and you have some hidden layer and you have the output. Then you have some activation functions, which is ReLU used here, and you have some weights like and bias here, W1, B1, W2, B2, and then you just use this inputs, and then you can check the outputs, which predicts your genus. So essentially, it has an expression like this. So you have some matrix W1 acting on your vector, two-dimensional vector. Then also has a bias, which is plus B1. Then in the hidden layer, it has a ReLU function, which makes your expression like this. And then you have a W2 acting on this thing, and with the plus a bias. And you can check this will be non-negative if you do the experiment. This output will also be non-negative. And in particular, it's only positive when genus is 1. And it's 0, it will predict genus 0. Namely, this is some step function gives the prediction. So then you can compare your G predict and G and plot this delta G is equal to G minus G predict, and your XY axis, and this is delta. Then you'll find the plot like this. So most of the time, these green regions, delta is equal to 0, meaning we have a perfect prediction, and these just in these small regions, the machine may make mistakes. So yeah, roughly this is like some attempt to try to we make just to try to get some explanations or to extract some useful information from the models. But as you can see, these are just very simple models. So these are very very simple questions because we only have like square roots or linear relations. But if you go to more complicated examples, like the amoeba question here, if you go to more complicated polygons, you will have more non-trivial relations, and it's more difficult to visualize, and it's more difficult to get some non-trivial relations. But still, you can try to find some non-trivial patterns for these, or non-trivial distributions for your data points. Yeah, I guess that's all I want to discuss. Thanks for your attention. Let me stop sharing. Are there any questions?
Okay, I don't see any particular questions. Are there chat also? Okay, so if there are no further questions, let us thank Jiakang for his tutorials, and we are meeting tomorrow, I think. So just 1 minute, let me look at the schedule.